The morning my dog brought me proof that my marriage was rotten. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand, and a spreadsheet of irrigation costs open on my laptop. Max, my German shepherd, trotted in from the hallway looking proud of himself. He had that loose, happy gait dogs get when they think they've found treasure and can't wait to be praised for it. At first I barely looked up. I thought he'd stolen one of my socks again. Then I saw what was hanging from his mouth. Something pale, slick, knotted, and unmistakably wrong. For a second, my brain refused to name it. It just stared. Max dropped it at my feet, tail thumping against the cabinet, waiting for approval. I remember making a sound then. Not a word. More like the body rejecting something before the mind has fully processed it. I stared at the thing on the hardwood floor and felt the room around me go thin and bright. Because there are discoveries that still leave room for doubt. A text, a receipt, a changed password, a late night explained a little too smoothly. And then there are discoveries that rip denial cleanly out by the root and drop it bleeding in front of you. That was mine. My name is Dennis Calloway. I was 39 years old when my dog carried my wife's betrayal into the kitchen. I had spent the previous 6 years turning myself into the kind of husband I thought a woman could lean her whole life against. I worked as an airplane mechanic at a regional airport outside Charleston. The job was hard on the body, harder on the patience, and unforgiving in exactly the way I had always liked. Metal either held or it didn't. A system either checked out or it didn't. A problem either got solved or it got someone hurt. I trusted things I could inspect. Maybe that's why love got me so badly. My wife, Celeste, had once told me I was the quietest good man she'd ever met. We were standing in a patch of dirt behind a half-dead farmhouse the first time she said it, before the vines, before the money, before I sold pieces of myself to make her dreams look inevitable. She wanted a vineyard, not a hobby vineyard, not a few decorative rows of grapes and a rustic sign out by the county road. She wanted the real thing. Acreage, tasting room, private label bottles, weddings in the golden hour, the whole polished fantasy of cultivated beauty and old-world refinement. She had a vision for everything: the rose, the stone terrace, the branding, the imported olive trees she swore would make people feel like they had stepped into Tuscany without leaving South Carolina. I loved her enough to believe the dream should belong to both of us. So I did what men like me do when the woman we love says she sees a future and asks whether we're brave enough to reach for it. I sacrificed quietly. I picked up double shifts at the airport and weekend contract, worked doing maintenance inspections on private aircraft. I sold my flight gear from the years when I thought I might someday finish my pilot certification. I emptied out a savings account I had built before I met her. I let go of old plans, old toys, old versions of myself with the easy self-righteousness of a man who thinks sacrifice guarantees meaning. I thought we were building something permanent. The vineyard became Celeste's world and then, slowly, her identity. She bloomed inside it in a way I found both beautiful and, if I'm honest, a little frightening. People listened to her there. She wore boots and linen shirts, and moved through the tasting room like she'd been born knowing how to make expensive strangers feel like they were part of a private miracle. She learned the language of acidity, finish, mineral notes, market positioning, event packages, distribution, social visibility. She made herself into a woman the town admired. I became the husband who kept the engine running. I handled the books when the accountant fell behind. I repaired the busted pump at 2 in the morning. I drove pallets, fixed fencing, negotiated with distributors, and showed up smelling like machine oil and fertilizer, while Celeste glowed in photographs under string lights with stemware in her hand. I told myself I didn't mind. Love makes martyrs out of practical men all the time. From the outside, our marriage looked enviable. Beautiful wife, beautiful land, ambitious business. Two people building something from scratch with their bare hands and shared faith. Inside it, I was becoming smaller. Not humiliated, not abused, just gradually translated into labor. At first the change in Celeste came so slowly I mistook it for success. She began leaving for work earlier, saying she wanted to walk the rows before the staff arrived. She stayed later, blaming vendor calls, accounting reconciliation, event planning, or some new consultant who was helping professionalize the operation. Her phone, once abandoned face-up on kitchen counters and bedside tables, became an extension of her hand. She changed her passcode, told me it was because too many event clients had private credit information in their messages. She turned the screen away when I walked by. She started sleeping with it under her pillow some nights. Her affection didn't disappear dramatically. It cooled the way a room cools after a heater has been shut off. So gradually, you only realize later how long you'd been trying not to shiver. We stopped talking about anything that wasn't logistical. Payroll, bottling, vendors, her mother calling too often, the irrigation line behind the south plot, a case order that got delayed in Savannah, which weekend we could maybe drive to Charlotte if the weather held. At night she felt both close and absent, lying in bed beside me like someone politely renting space in a life she had already started leaving. The first time I noticed she had changed her perfume, I almost laughed at myself for caring. The second time, I started watching. The third time, I knew something in my marriage had shifted into a language I no longer spoke. Her excuses got smoother. Extra meetings, staff issues, unexpected tastings, distribution dinners, emergency visits from investors. The part that hurt, looking back, wasn't just the lying. It was the way she looked bored by the need to lie. Like I was too blunt an instrument to require much finesse. And then Max came into the kitchen carrying evidence in his mouth. After I stopped dry heaving long enough to think, I grabbed a paper towel, picked the thing up with 2 fingers, and stared at the ceiling like it might offer a version of reality where there was another explanation. There was. Max had found it under our bed. Not in the trash. Not in the guest room. Not somewhere I could tell myself a stray worker or party guest had been careless. Under our bed. That morning I didn't confront Celeste. I bagged the evidence, took a photo of where Max had dropped it, washed my hands twice. Then I sat back down at the kitchen table and looked around the room as if the walls might confess next. By the time Celeste came downstairs in riding boots and a cream sweater, composed and lovely and already scrolling through her phone, my face was calm again. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She kissed the side of my head, not my mouth, and reached for coffee. I watched my wife move around our kitchen with easy familiarity and understood something ugly. Whatever had happened in our house had happened recently enough that the air still felt changed. "Big day?" I asked. She shrugged lightly. "Tasting at 11. Distributor call at 2. David wants to go over the Charleston boutique placement before dinner." David. There it was. Casual as weather. David Mercer was a sales rep turned consultant, which meant he wore expensive boots, called every woman sweetheart as though it were a regional kindness, and seemed to know exactly how long to hold eye contact before people started mistaking charm for character. He had been around the vineyard more often the last year, helping Celeste broker distribution relationships and event contracts. He laughed too easily, touched shoulders too casually, had the kind of confidence men build when other people keep rewarding them for being handsome in rooms full of money. I had never trusted him, but distrust is not proof. Now I had proof. What I needed next was scope. Instead of confronting her, I did what I had learned to do in every hard season of my life. I went methodical. I approached my marriage the way I approached an aircraft after someone said it had made a strange noise in the air. Slowly, carefully, assuming that if one thing was visibly wrong, then deeper stress fractures were probably hiding nearby. First I checked what she assumed I never would. Our joint accounts, then the business expense cards, then the reimbursements, then the vendor disbursements that crossed between household and vineyard operations. Celeste had always thought of me as reliable, not sophisticated, useful, not strategic. She knew I could fix a broken hydraulic line in a crosswind and rebuild a corroded housing bracket in silence, but she had forgotten that quiet men often survive by noticing. What I found made the room colder. There were hotel charges disguised as tasting travel, small transfers routed through a side account I hadn't opened and she hadn't disclosed, wine club membership reimbursements that didn't match actual member names, catering invoices paid twice, gas purchases near Charleston on nights she claimed she'd been in Beaufort, a second debit card tied to a private account receiving little drips of money from our household reserves, too small individually to start a fight, big enough together to fund betrayal comfortably. No spyware, no cinematic hacking, just patience, statements, timestamps, and a woman who believed her husband's trust would stay blind forever. Then I checked the family iPad, we used only for vendor presentations and event calendars. She had synced parts of her email to it once and apparently forgotten. That mistake broke the rest open. Not explicit messages. Celeste was smarter than that. But calendar blocks, travel confirmations, redacted invoice PDFs, a boutique hotel loyalty account, and one folder of archived voice notes she had exported and named meeting recaps. Inside one of them was David's voice, low and amused. "If he ever wakes up, you're going to have to pick." Then Celeste, tired and contemptuous. "He won't wake up. Dennis thinks sacrifice is the same thing as intimacy." I played that line 3 times. There are moments in a marriage when you realize not only that your spouse has betrayed you, but that they have privately defined you in a way designed to make your suffering feel deserved. That sentence did that. It wasn't just an affair. It was contempt. And contempt is where vengeance starts getting ideas. I didn't sleep much over the next week. I started telling Celeste I had longer shifts. Instead of coming straight home, I sat in parking lots and studied records. I mapped dates, matched false business trips to hotel stays, cross-checked boutique placement meetings that had never happened against event charges that absolutely had. The affair with David had been going on for at least a year, maybe longer. There was a hidden account with nearly $20,000 in it, fed by a mix of vineyard leakages and our own household money. Enough for trips, enough for dinners, enough, I suspected, for a quieter exit strategy if she ever wanted one. That was the point when a simple divorce stopped feeling proportionate, because affairs happen inside weakness all the time. What I was looking at was structure, planning, extraction. Then came the thing that pushed me past grief and into something harder. A Thursday night in Charleston, after a supplier dinner I hadn't attended because Celeste had insisted she could handle the city people alone. I stopped into a hotel bar near King Street to clear my head before driving home. I was halfway through a bourbon when a man I'd never seen before slid into the empty stool beside me and said, without looking at me, "If your wife hands you another drink tonight, don't finish it." I turned slowly. He was maybe 50, red-faced, expensive watch, wedding band, tan line but no ring. The kind of man who'd spent enough time around luxury to think warning strangers in bars was beneath him. "What?" He still didn't look at me. "I've seen her with the dark-haired guy. Vineyard people. Consultant type. She told him tonight she'd have to dose you if she wanted a clean overnight." I stared at him. "That's not funny." He gave a tired little exhale. "I'm not joking. You can believe me or not. But if she pours for you, switch glasses." Then he stood, dropped cash on the bar, and left without another word. I sat there with my hand around the bourbon glass, so long the ice disappeared. If he had been trying to start a fight, he chose the wrong man and the wrong tone. There had been no thrill in him, only disgust. I drove home with my jaw locked. Celeste was waiting in the kitchen in silk and bare feet, 2 glasses of wine on the counter. She smiled when she saw me, too brightly. "I thought you'd be later, wrapped early." She slid one glass toward me. And because sometimes you only get one chance to confirm what you fear, I picked it up, pretended to take a sip, then set it down and asked her to check something outside on the back porch where I'd claimed to hear Max barking earlier. The moment she stepped out, I switched the glasses. Not because I was certain, because certainty was no longer available in my life except through testing. She came back in, apologized for the weather, picked up the glass now meant for me, and drank from it while asking if I'd seen the revised event deck for the holiday harvest gala. By the time we were halfway through the conversation, her eyelids had grown heavy. She tried to play it off. "I'm exhausted," she murmured. "I think I'm just overtired." Within 15 minutes she could barely hold her head up. I helped her to bed, and while she slept with the dead weight of chemically assisted exhaustion beside me, I sat in the dark reading through a recovered batch of synced voice notes from her hotel folder until I found the one that changed everything. David again. A low rustle in the background. Her voice sharper this time. "I want him gone." There was a pause. Then David laughed. "Gone where?" "Out of the house. Off the land. Out of the decisions. I can't keep splitting myself like this." The file ended there. If she had said dead, I would have gone to the police that second. She didn't. But gone was enough. Not because it meant murder. Because it meant replacement. I had financed the dream, built the structure, sold pieces of my own life for it. And now she wanted me removed from the finished version like scaffolding no one photographs once the building is done. That was the moment I stopped seeing myself as a wounded husband and started seeing myself as a man standing inside hostile takeover territory. Once that thought clicked into place, the rest of me got colder. There is a line some betrayed people never cross. A line where grief remains grief, where dignity remains clean, where the injured party leaves with the moral simplicity of the wronged. I did not stay on that side. And I'm not going to lie to you and say I regret every inch of that. My mother-in-law, Linda, had always liked me more than Celeste realized. Linda was still beautiful in the dangerous, slow-burning way some women become after 50, when they have stopped needing approval and started weaponizing composure. She saw everything and commented on almost nothing. During the early years of the vineyard, she was the only one in Celeste's family who ever asked me whether I was tired, whether I missed flying, whether I felt like any of the dreams still belonged to me. After the audio clip, after the drugged wine, after the word gone, I started noticing Linda noticing me. At first it was simple. A phone call checking on the next fundraiser. A lunch when Celeste was too busy. A quiet remark about how much I had given that no one seemed to count anymore. Grief makes attention feel like morphine, and revenge makes it feel like permission. I didn't set out the first time intending to cross the line with Linda. That would be a cleaner story than the truth. The truth is that by then I wanted to hurt Celeste in a way that would not just cost her money or reputation. I wanted to contaminate her emotional geography. I wanted to take something sacred and make it poisonous. Linda and I started with conversation, then drinks, then the sort of charged silences grown adults use when they know exactly what they are risking and are no longer pretending innocence is available. One night in her guest house after a charity tasting, with the whole vineyard sleeping under frost and moonlight, she put her hand over mine and said, "She has never understood what it costs to be loved by a man like you." That should have been the moment I stood up and walked out. Instead, it was the moment I leaned in. "I won't give you details. There's nothing noble in them. Only this. I began an affair with my wife's mother, and I did it knowing exactly what kind of wound it would make if the truth ever surfaced. If you want to hate me for that, I won't argue." At the time, it felt less like losing myself than like finally using the darkness someone else had invited into my life. Meanwhile, the rest of Celeste's hidden world kept widening. There were more people involved than I'd known. Not just David, not just a private affair. There was a whole orbit of vineyard-adjacent friends and industry couples using out-of-town wine weekends as cover for a softer, more polished kind of sexual chaos. Swapped rooms, paired dinners, curated after-parties, where loyalty dissolved behind expensive bottles and plausible deniability. No grainy motel scandal, no cheap motel cliché. Just beautiful people in linen and soft lighting constructing little private liberties for themselves, while ordinary spouses stayed home believing in business travel. Celeste and David were not improvising betrayal. They were part of a culture built to normalize it. That was when I built the trap. Not explicit video, not anything I'd have to defend to a prosecutor or a judge or my own future self. I was too careful for that. Too cold by then. What I built instead was a dossier. Then a hidden link. Security stills from hotel lobbies. Audio excerpts. Duplicated itineraries. Transfer records. Screenshots of calendar overlays. Caterer confirmations that place the same people in the same places under false pretenses. Enough to prove the pattern without turning myself into the criminal in the story. I uploaded it to a private server under an anonymous URL and sent a teaser from a burner account to the small circle I knew would recognize themselves instantly. Not the full file, just enough. A single still of David's hand, the small of Celeste's back in a Charleston hotel lobby. A subject line, "You should all talk before this spreads." That was all it took. Panic is immediate among people who have spent years protecting image. By dawn, my phone, my real phone, not the public one, was ringing with blocked calls, then unknown calls, then one voicemail after another from numbers I didn't save because I didn't need to. The tone was always the same, no matter the words. Fear. Celeste noticed before noon. She came into the kitchen pale and furious, phone in her hand, demanding to know whether I had seen something insane circulating among the Charleston group. I looked up from the table, where I was sharpening a pencil with absurd calm. "I might have," I said. Her face changed. That was when she knew. The confrontation didn't happen in private. I didn't want private anymore. I let the panic grow for 48 hours while the Harvest Gala approached, our biggest public event of the year, with investors, club members, local press, distributors, and both families attending. The vineyard never looked better than it did that weekend. Lanterns in the rows, candle-lit tables, velvet black sky, the tasting terrace glowing gold. Beauty everywhere. Perfect stage. By then David was unraveling. One of the other women involved had confessed enough to her husband to start her own domestic fire. Another participant's employer had quietly placed him on leave after ethics questions, tied to expense fraud. The whole hidden network was eating itself. At 8:20 that Saturday night, while Celeste floated through the terrace in a dark green gown playing Vineyard Queen for a crowd that still adored her, I asked for the microphone. I thanked everyone for supporting the vineyard, for believing in hard work and community and honest craftsmanship. Then I said there was one more thing I needed to address, because success built on deception never holds, and I had spent too many years paying for lies. The terrace went silent. I had a screen rolled out behind me under the pretense of the end-of-season visual presentation. What appeared on it was not sex. It was worse. A timeline, photos, transfers, travel overlaps, redacted voice note transcripts, dates, locations, names, enough truth to destroy every last hiding place. Celeste's face drained of color so fast it almost looked theatrical. David actually took a step backward. I remember lifting the small remote in my hand and saying, very calmly, "If any of you still think this is gossip, I'm happy to keep going." No one challenged me. Because guilt recognizes itself before the room does. The whole terrace broke into pockets of shock. Investors whispering, spouses going still. One woman crying before her husband even turned toward her. David's phone started buzzing in his pocket and did not stop. Celeste tried to come toward me first, maybe thinking she could manage it physically if she moved fast enough. Then she saw Linda standing near the back of the crowd. Linda did not look away. I will never forget that moment. Of every injury in that story, every night and lie and transaction, the expression on Celeste's face when she looked from me to her mother was the only one that carried anything like real destruction in it. Because in that second she understood there had been another betrayal running beneath hers. A darker one, more intimate, more poisonous, one she had never imagined, because she had never imagined anyone else could become as merciless as she had been. She didn't scream. She just stared, and I watched the architecture of her identity give way all at once. After that, everything started collapsing quickly. David lost his position within a week once the expense irregularities and falsified travel reimbursements surfaced publicly enough that his employer couldn't protect him without inviting scrutiny. His wife took the kids and left. The boutique placement contract he'd been bragging about vanished. He ended up in a furnished studio near North Charleston, selling a watch I recognized from happier, dirtier days at the Vineyard. Celeste lost more slowly, which I think hurt her more. Not overnight ruin. Worse, the long drip of social death. Investors pulled back. A board review froze her decision-making authority. Her father, who had never once taken my side in anything, looked at the evidence and told her she had confused ambition with appetite for too long. Her carefully built local image curdled into whispers every time she entered a room. And then Linda left town for 6 weeks without explanation, which was explanation enough. By the time the divorce papers were filed, the Vineyard no longer belonged emotionally to either of us. It had become a monument to what two people can build while quietly becoming strangers. Celeste fought it first. Blame, tears, gaslighting, claims that I had become distant years before, that she had been lonely, that I had made martyrdom my whole personality, that none of this would have happened if I had known how to be a husband instead of a foreman. Some of that was even true in pieces, but truth in pieces is how liars survive. What held was the evidence, the money, the audio, the hidden account, the expenses, the fact that she had tried to chemically sideline me, even if only to make her own life easier for a night. And though it never went into any legal filing, the look on her face when she understood what had happened between me and her mother. I kept the house. I did not keep the Vineyard. People always imagine that means I lost. It didn't. I was done paying to preserve a dream that had started tasting like blood. The Vineyard went through restructuring, then sale, then rebrand under outside ownership 18 months later. New signage, new management, new story for tourists who never would have guessed how much betrayal had soaked into those rows before the first frost. Linda and I ended in silence. There was no future in what we did, only damage and the brief, intoxicating illusion that mutual ruin can feel like intimacy if enough people have betrayed you first. I have not spoken to her in years. If I sound colder than I was, that is because time edits the temperature out of memory before it removes the facts. The truth is that I was not victorious in the clean, masculine way stories like this like to promise. I was changed. There's a difference. By the time the dust settled, David was broke, half ghosted by the world he once moved through easily, and drinking too much in a room that smelled like old carpet and mold. Celeste was living in a rental house outside town, trying to reinvent herself for people who remembered too much. The whole pretty social cluster that had fed on secrecy was fractured. Divorces, firings, quiet relocations, a few people trying to present it as overblown gossip, most too ashamed to attempt even that. And me. I went back to work, back to runways and maintenance logs, and steel under my hands and the blessed honesty of things that either fail or don't. I slept better in airport motels than I had in my own bed for a year. Max got older, grayer around the muzzle. He still followed me room to room, as if one horrible morning in the kitchen had turned him permanently into my witness. Sometimes people ask in one form or another whether it was worth it. The exposure, The affair with Linda. The hidden link. The public humiliation. The total detonation. I never know how to answer without sounding like a liar. Was it worth destroying them? Some days, yes. Was it worth destroying parts of myself in the process? No, but revenge is rarely a clean transfer of pain. It's a fire. It spreads where it can. What I know now is simpler and less satisfying. The marriage died before Max ever came trotting into that kitchen with his tail wagging. It died in the small contempts, in the private jokes, in the way Celeste started treating my sacrifice as background noise instead of love, in the hidden account, in the ease with which she imagined my removal from the life I helped build. The rest, my investigation, her panic, David's collapse, Linda's mouth on mine, the harvest gala, the screen lighting up with everyone's secrets, that was aftermath pretending to be climax. The real ending had come much earlier. I just hadn't yet been handed something pale and undeniable enough to force me to see it. The last time I drove past the vineyard, the new owners had changed the gates and planted fresh signage out front. The olive trees were taller. The terrace was full. String lights glowed over strangers lifting glasses to a version of the place that had never known me. I sat in the truck with Max panting softly in the passenger seat and watched people laugh on land I had bled for and then burned down. I expected bitterness. What I felt instead was emptiness first, then something almost like mercy. Not for Celeste, not for David, not even for myself. For the younger man I had once been, the one who sold his flight gear and picked up double shifts and thought devotion alone could keep a marriage holy. He didn't know yet that love without respect turns into labor. That sacrifice without reciprocity becomes invisibility. That quiet men can become dangerous when the people they built their lives around start mistaking silence for weakness. Max nudged my arm with his nose. I started the truck and drove away. That was all there was left to do.